My name is Brandon. I was 41 years old when I stood in the darkened hallway of my own home, still wearing my coat, a brown paper bag in one hand and a bouquet of white tulips in the other, and heard my wife tell her mother exactly what she thought of me. She called me predictable. She said I was the safe choice, and I always had been. Then she laughed. Easy, unbothered. The kind of laugh a person releases when they are completely certain they are not being heard. And she said, "Mama, I just need to hold on 6 more months. Until the Meridian contract closes. Then I am walking out of this marriage, and I am not looking back." The paper bag was from Bella Roma on Glendale Avenue. Her favorite. Chicken piccata with extra capers. The garlic bread she always said she was not going to eat, and then finished before I had touched mine. I had left work 40 minutes early to pick it up because tomorrow was supposed to be the night we started over. Tomorrow was our reconciliation. Our new beginning. 7 weeks of separation. 7 weeks of Sunday phone calls that started guarded and ended warmer. 7 weeks of couples counseling where I sat across from my wife and watched her cry and held her hand through the hardest parts and believed, completely and without reservation, that we were fighting our way back to something worth saving. I had believed it the way a man believes something when he has decided, not casually, not out of weakness, but deliberately, in the deepest and most considered part of himself, that the marriage is worth the fight. That love, when it is real, deserves to be worked for. The tulips were white. She had mentioned them once, 3 years earlier, at a weekend flower market we had wandered through on a Saturday morning before everything became complicated. She said tulips were underrated. That people always defaulted to roses, but tulips had a kind of clean, quiet elegance that roses were too busy being dramatic to carry. I had filed that away in the way I filed away everything she told me when she was unguarded and just herself. Carefully, precisely, as something worth keeping. I had driven 20 minutes out of my way to get the right ones. Her voice came through the partially open door of the sitting room, low and comfortable and completely at ease. The kind of voice a person uses when they are certain they are alone in the house. "He is going to do what Brandon always does," she said. There was warmth in how she said my name, but not the kind of warmth that costs anything. It was the warmth of someone describing a reliable appliance. "He is going to be patient and steady and give me time and believe the best about everything." That man has never in his 11 years of knowing me stopped believing the best about me. Her mother said something I couldn't fully make out through the door. Then Vanessa said, "That is exactly what I am counting on." Something in the hallway went very still. I stood there in my coat with the food and the flowers, and I let those words move through me once, slowly, completely. I did not push them away. I did not reach for an explanation that would soften them. I let them be exactly what they were, because they deserved that much from me. The truth deserves to be faced fully, even when, especially when, it is the last thing you expected to be standing in front of. The garlic bread in the bag was still warm. I could feel it through the paper. I set the tulips down on the hallway table. Quietly. The way you set something down when you want to make absolutely sure it doesn't break. Then I walked to the kitchen. I unwrapped the food and put it in the oven on low because it deserved better than to go cold. And because the version of me that was still processing what I had just heard was also still capable of doing the small, careful things right. I washed my hands at the sink and looked out the window at the backyard, at the maple tree we had planted together in the 2nd year of our marriage, at the garden bed Vanessa had abandoned 3 summers ago when her attention shifted toward the business. I stood there for a long time. Let me tell you what I did not do. I did not go into that sitting room. I did not confront or accuse or give her the chance to construct an explanation before I had a clear understanding of what, exactly, I was confronting. A man who moves before he understands the full picture is a man who gives away his advantage before he has even assessed what his advantage is. My father taught me that. He said it in the context of negotiating a car purchase when I was 17, but the principle was always bigger than the example. What I did was make a decision. Clean, quiet, final. Tomorrow's dinner was still happening. She simply did not know yet what kind of dinner it was going to be. Here is what Vanessa did not know about me. The thing that almost nobody knows about a genuinely quiet man until the moment he stops being quiet. I am an architect. I have spent 18 years designing structures that appear simple, even effortless, from the outside. Structures that feel inevitable once they are standing, as though they could not have been built any other way. What most people never see is the calculation underneath. the load-bearing work, the years of measured, precise, painstaking engineering that makes the final structure possible. I understand what holds a thing up, and I understand what takes it down. I had spent 7 weeks believing I was fighting to save my marriage. Standing at that kitchen sink on a Tuesday evening in October, I finally, completely, clearly understood what I was actually dealing with. And the man she had been counting on to be patient and steady and predictable reached into the pocket of his coat and pulled out his phone and began, very quietly, to do what he was best at. He began to build. That night, after the food had been eaten and the kitchen had been cleaned and the ordinary choreography of 2 people ending a day together had been completed, I lay on my back in the dark and looked at the ceiling and ran through 11 years of memory with the new understanding I was carrying. I thought about every dinner party where Vanessa had been warm and present and made every person in the room feel like the most interesting person she had spoken to that night. I thought about how that quality had been one of the things I loved most about her in the beginning. That genuine interest, that ability to make connection feel real. And I thought about when, exactly, I had stopped asking myself whether that quality was being applied to the people in our life or to the management of them. I thought about the business, about the version of its finances I had been given over the 3 years it had been operating, the quarterly summaries that were clear and organized and reassuring. The growth charts Vanessa would sometimes show me on her laptop on a Sunday morning over coffee, pointing to numbers that indicated progress, narrating the arc with the confident precision of someone who understood their field completely. I had looked at those numbers with pride, and not once, not a single time, had I looked past them to what was underneath. Trust. That word again. The word that, in the wrong architecture, becomes the wall that keeps you from seeing. I thought about tomorrow. About the restaurant she had suggested, the dress I had seen her lay out that afternoon on the edge of the bed, the speech I had written in my head 14 different times in the 7 weeks since we had separated, the speech about choosing each other, about building on what we had been, about the future I was still willing to fight for. That speech was done now, but I was not. I turned off the lamp at 11:45. I closed my eyes. I thought about my father, who had taught me every important thing I knew about what a man's character was for. He used to say that a man's character is not what he does when things are easy. It is what he does when the thing he is facing is harder than anything he prepared for. This was harder than anything I had prepared for. I closed my eyes and I let that be true. And then I decided what I was going to do about it. Let me tell you who Vanessa was before I tell you who she chose to become. Because those are 2 genuinely different stories, and I owe it to the truth to keep them separate. The distance between them is where 11 years of my life slowly, quietly changed shape without my full understanding of what was happening. I met Vanessa Caldwell at a mutual friend's housewarming on a Saturday evening in November, 11 years ago. She was standing near the bookshelf on the far wall of the living room, not posing near it the way people sometimes do at parties when they want to appear thoughtful. Actually reading the spines, her head tilted at a slight angle, moving slowly from one end to the other with the quiet concentration of someone who intended to remember what she saw. I walked over because I was curious. Nothing more complicated than that. I wanted to know what a woman who read bookshelves at parties was actually thinking about. We talked for the entire evening, long past the point when the food was gone and the other guests had thinned out. By the time the host was turning off the kitchen lights, Vanessa and I were still on the back porch, 2 barely touched glasses between us on the railing, talking in the way you only talk with someone when you have forgotten to be careful about what you reveal. She was 29. She had been running the operational side of an event design company for 4 years and was deeply, productively frustrated by the ceiling above her head. She was sharp in the way that comes from watching and listening more than speaking. She formed opinions slowly and held them with confidence. She laughed easily but not cheaply. She asked questions that went one level deeper than the obvious question, which is the thing I noticed most, because that is the quality that tells you how a person thinks. I drove home that night and called my older brother Darnell at 11 o'clock and said, "I just met someone." Darnell said, "You sound like you mean it." I said, "I really do." We dated for 18 months. I proposed on a Sunday afternoon on the back porch of the same house where we had first talked, because it felt right to return to where the thing actually began. She laughed first, and then her eyes went bright with tears, and she said yes 3 times, the way a person says something when they want to make absolutely certain it has been fully received. We married the following September. 60 people, intimate. Exactly what we had both said we wanted. My mother danced with my uncle at the reception until both of them were winded. Vanessa's father gave a toast that made the room go quiet in the best way. We honeymooned in New Orleans, which had been on both our lists independently before we knew each other existed. The early years were as real as anything I have ever lived. I want to say that clearly and without reservation, because the revisionist impulse, the urge to look back at a failed relationship and claim you always knew something was wrong, is something I have no interest in indulging. We were good. We were genuinely, fully, substantively good. We argued, of course. Real marriages do. Money in the early years, when both of us were still building our careers, and every financial decision carried weight. My hours on complex architectural projects. Her impatience with any process that moved slower than her internal pace. Her habit of making significant decisions and telling me after the fact, presented as efficiency but experienced as exclusion. These were not small frictions. They were real, but they were workable, and we worked them. We came back to each other. We found each other again. The turn, and every marriage that ends has one. A moment or a season where something shifts that does not fully shift back. Came the year Vanessa left the company she had worked at for 7 years and launched Caldwell Event Design. She had been planning it for the entire time I had known her. The idea had always been in her, clear and specific and waiting for the right conditions. When those conditions arrived, I supported her the way I supported everything she cared about, completely, practically, and without needing to be asked. I restructured how we managed household finances to reduce pressure on her in the building phase. I took on 2 additional architectural contracts in the first year to cover the income gap. I contributed a significant amount from our shared savings as starting capital because I believed in what she could build and I wanted to be part of the foundation. And she built something real. I watched it happen. The first client. The second. The word of mouth that started slowly and then accelerated. The reputation that began to precede the name. She was talented, genuinely talented, and watching her work in full motion, in charge, fully expressed, completely in her element, was one of the things that reminded me, during the hard stretches of those early years, exactly why I had walked across a room at a party to talk to a woman reading book spines. What I did not do, during that period, was maintain close attention to the actual financial architecture of what she was building. I want to be specific about why, because the reason matters to how I understand what happened. It was not negligence. It was not disinterest. It was, at its core, an act of love that I had not thought carefully enough about. The business was hers. The dream was hers. The expertise was entirely hers. And in my desire to be the kind of husband who fully supports rather than hovers, who trusts rather than monitors, I created a space of genuine informational distance between myself and the financial reality of a business that had my name on the founding documents and my savings in the original account. I stepped back because I trusted her, and she walked someone else into the space that trust created. Looking back, I understand exactly when the warmth began to have a different quality. It was not cold. That is the important thing to say. It still looked like love, still had the shape and weight of love. But something underneath it had shifted from genuine to managed. From her actually being present to her maintaining the appearance of being present while her real attention was somewhere else entirely. I told myself she was tired. Then I told myself she was focused on the business. Then I stopped looking for explanations and settled into the explanation-free assumption that things would return to the warmth they had been at before, because they always had before. That assumption was the last and most costly thing she used against me. My father used to say, from behind the newspaper at the Sunday breakfast table, with the ease of a man who has thought about something long enough that saying it aloud costs nothing, "Son, the most important thing you can know about a person is how they behave when they believe they are not being observed." Standing in that hallway in my coat, with the food getting warm in the oven and the tulips on the table, I finally heard him clearly. I drove to Darnell's house the next morning without calling first. 45 minutes of early highway, thin traffic, the radio off. The kind of drive you take when you need the motion without the distraction. I needed to move through space at speed while the thing inside me settled into the shape it was going to hold. Darnell opened the door before I had finished climbing the porch steps. He looked at my face, one long, complete look, the kind that takes inventory. And then he stepped back and said, "Come in." He asked nothing. He had known me for 41 years, and he had developed, over those decades, the particular wisdom of knowing when a question would slow the wrong thing down. His wife Carla was in the kitchen. She looked up when I came through, and something in how she looked at Darnell told me they had had the beginning of a conversation I hadn't asked for, which meant Darnell had felt something coming before I arrived. Carla poured 3 cups of coffee and then took hers to the back of the house with the quiet grace of a woman who understands when 2 brothers need a room to themselves. That is one of the truest things about Carla. She knows precisely when to be present and precisely when the most loving thing she can offer is her absence. I sat at Darnell's kitchen table and I told him everything. Word by word, as close to exact as I could hold it. The side door, the hallway, the food in my hand, the tulips I had set on the table so carefully. Her voice on the phone, easy and unbothered and completely certain. The Meridian contract, the 6 months, and the sentence that had been sitting in my chest since the night before. That is exactly what I am counting on. Darnell listened through all of it without a word. His hands wrapped around his coffee cup, his eyes steady on the table, his expression the particular neutral of a man who is receiving information and refusing to let his reaction get ahead of the information itself. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "How long do you think she's been planning it?" "I don't know yet," I said. "But it isn't new." The way she said it, the ease of it, that's not the language of something she decided recently. That's the language of something she's been living with long enough that it's become completely comfortable. "The Meridian contract," he said. "You mentioned she brought that up a few months ago. Once. Said it was the largest opportunity the business had gone after. That if it closed, it would change the scale of what she could do." I paused. I was proud of her when she told me that. Darnell looked at me, not with pity, with the level, honest attention of a man who understood exactly what that sentence contained. "So the 6 months isn't about the marriage," he said. "The reconciliation was never about the marriage," I said. And saying it out loud, clearly and plainly, was the first time I had let it land without any part of me trying to soften it. It was about maintaining the status quo while she completed the exit she had already planned. "What do you need?" Darnell asked. "The full financial picture," I said. "I put real money into that business. My name is on original documents. I have not had actual access to the accounts in 2 years because I trusted her to manage them. That trust was apparently the door she walked everything through." Darnell stood up and went to the counter where his phone was charging. "I know someone," he said. "Her name is Claudette Simmons. She does forensic accounting, private clients mostly. She worked on something connected to the school district 2 years back. I watched her reconstruct a financial picture from documents that 3 attorneys had already reviewed and cleared. She found things they had not found. She is thorough in a way that doesn't leave room for argument." He picked up the phone. "Let me call her," he said. He did not ask if I was ready. He simply moved because movement was what the moment required, and he had always understood that about me. That what I needed, in the moments when things were genuinely hard, was not comfort offered in advance of clarity. I needed the path forward. Comfort, for me, was a byproduct of doing the right thing, not the other way around. Claudette could meet Thursday. Darnell said he was coming with me, and I did not protest, because some things are better witnessed, and because his presence at a table has a weight and a steadiness that I have relied on more times than I have ever articulated. I drove home that afternoon and went through the motions of the evening with the same careful steadiness I had maintained since the night before. Vanessa came in around 7. She kissed my cheek. She smelled like the light floral she always wore to client meetings. She asked whether I had eaten, and I said I had picked something up, which was true. We sat in the living room for a while, and she talked about a venue she had toured for a client, and I asked questions, and she answered them, and none of it touched what was actually happening beneath the surface of that conversation. After she went upstairs, I sat at the kitchen table alone and opened the notebook I had started the night before. I wrote for 2 hours. Everything I knew, everything I suspected, every financial decision I had been party to over the course of the business's life, every amount, every date I could recall, every conversation in which I had been given what now appeared to be a curated version of information rather than the full picture. When I was done, I had 11 pages. I closed the notebook and held it in both hands for a moment. Then I put it in my briefcase, turned off the kitchen light, and went upstairs. I got into bed beside my wife, who was already asleep, who was sleeping easily in the way of someone who has nothing unresolved on her conscience, because the thing she was doing did not register to her as wrong in any way that disrupted her rest. I lay on my back in the dark and looked at the ceiling, and I thought about my father. He had been a man of very specific, very steady values. He did not negotiate them for convenience or soften them for company. He held them the same in private as in public, which is the rarest and most admirable form of integrity I have ever witnessed in a person. He passed away 6 years ago, and there is not a week that goes by in which I do not hear his voice in some corridor of a situation I am working through. That night I heard him say, as clearly as if he were in the room, "You do not have all the information yet. Get the information first. Then decide. Never the other way around." I closed my eyes. I gave myself until Thursday. Claudette Simmons ran her practice out of a fourth-floor office in a building near the courthouse district. Her waiting room had 2 chairs, a small table, and no magazines. The absence of magazines struck me as the truest possible signal about how she conducted her work. She was not interested in filling time. She was interested in the thing you came for. She shook my hand firmly, directed me to the chair across from her desk, and said, "Tell me what you know and what you think you know. Keep them separated. That distinction will matter." I liked her immediately. I had come prepared. For 3 years, I had held co-signer status on the original Caldwell event design business account. I had simply never accessed it directly because Vanessa managed the business finances, and I had never been given a reason to do otherwise. That trust, as Claudette would confirm, had been the unlocked door. I put the folder on her desk and slid it across. 3 years of household statements. The original business account documentation bearing my name. The savings withdrawal records from when we had funded the business launch, and every business-related expense I had been aware of and agreed to over the life of the marriage. She read through the folder for 27 minutes. She turned pages deliberately, occasionally going back to cross-reference something, making small notations in pencil on a notepad she kept to her left. Her expression remained completely neutral throughout. Not cold, neutral. The particular neutrality of a professional who knows that reactions are expensive and she could not afford them on someone else's behalf. When she set the folder down, she took off her reading glasses and placed them with the same deliberateness she applied to everything else. "You are listed as a co-signer on the original business account," she said, "but you have not accessed the statements in what appears to be approximately 24 months. Vanessa managed the finances," I said. "I trusted the structure because I trusted the person running it." She looked at me with the expression of a woman who has sat across from many intelligent people who made exactly this decision and is far past being surprised by it. Not judgmental. Recognizing. "The original account," she said, "shows activity that is consistent with a small event design business at the lower end of viable. Supplier invoices, venue deposits, staffing, a modest marketing budget. If you reviewed those statements in isolation, you would see a business working hard to sustain itself. Nothing exceptional. Nothing alarming." "But," I said. "But there is a second account," she said. "Opened 22 months ago. Your name is not on it, and there is no documentation suggesting you were consulted about its creation." The room was very still. "Tell me everything," I said. She turned the notepad toward me. There was a name I had never encountered. An LLC, a different name from the original business, registered 22 months ago with Vanessa's signature on the formation documents. And beside her signature, a second name, Jerome Patterson. "His professional background," Claudette said, pulling a separate sheet from a folder beside her notepad, "is in corporate event logistics. He runs a mid-sized firm with several large institutional relationships. He has been operating in the event industry for 14 years. He is, by most professional assessments, well regarded." She paused. "The Meridian Group is one of his existing clients," she said. Something settled in my chest like a stone finding the bottom of still water. "The Meridian contract," I said, "would not have been accessible to Caldwell Event Design through normal business development channels," Claudette said carefully. "The relationship required an existing institutional connection. Patterson's firm has that connection. The second LLC, the one both their names are on, is structured to absorb the Meridian contract when it closes." She laced her fingers on the desk. "The original business, the entity your investment created and your name anchors, will be dissolved or transferred at minimal assessed value once the second entity is fully operational and the contract is secured. I heard the words with clarity I wish I had not had. So the business I funded, I said slowly, was used to build the infrastructure and professional reputation that made a second, more profitable entity viable. An entity I have no stake in and was never told about. The operational foundation, the client management systems, the vendor network, the portfolio that made the second company immediately credible to institutional clients. Yes, Claudette said. That foundation came from the original business. My investment built the foundation, I said. And then I was removed from what the foundation made possible. That is one accurate way to state it, she said. I looked at the window behind her. The city stretched beyond it, gray and moving in the early afternoon light. There is one more item, Claudette said. She produced a final document and set it on the desk between us. A lease. The Riverside District, one of the most sought-after residential addresses in the city. Signed 3 months ago. 2 names on the contract. Vanessa's name and Jerome Patterson's. The room was very quiet. Darnell, sitting in the chair to my left, read it at the same moment I did. Neither of us spoke for a full minute. There was nothing to say that the document had not already said more completely than any words either of us had available. She was not coming back, Darnell said. His voice was low and even. Not an accusation. A fact being placed on the table. She was never planning to, I said. I looked at the lease for another long moment. Then I closed the folder. I need the complete documentation, I said to Claudette. Every transfer, every date, both accounts, both entities, the lease, Patterson's involvement from the beginning. Everything that can be printed and signed and verified. Claudette picked up her glasses. That, she said, is exactly what I do. I stood, shook her hand, thanked her with the specificity the moment required, and walked out of her office and down 4 flights of stairs to the lobby where the afternoon light came through the glass doors in long slanted lines. Darnell walked beside me to the parking garage without speaking. We stood by my car for a moment with the sounds of the city moving around us. What's the move, he said. She thinks tomorrow is about reconciliation, I said. I'm going to let her keep thinking that. Right up until the moment it isn't. Darnell looked at me for a long time with the particular expression he reserves for the moments he is deciding whether to say something additional. He decided not to. He simply put his hand briefly on my shoulder, once, and then we got in our separate cars and drove into the rest of the afternoon. The 7 days between the hallway and the dinner were the most demanding performance of my adult life. And I say performance not because I was being dishonest about anything that was asked of me directly, but because I was maintaining the surface of a life that I now understood in an entirely different way than the person sharing it with me believed I did. Every morning, I made coffee. I asked how she had slept. I sat across from her at the kitchen table and made conversation about the ordinary details of 2 people's days. I listened when she talked about client meetings and vendor negotiations and the normal business of a life being lived beside mine. And I asked questions that were genuine, because even then, even knowing what I knew, I could not perform disinterest in a person I had spent 11 years caring about. That was the most difficult part, not maintaining the surface. The surface was manageable through discipline and clarity of purpose. The difficult part was that underneath the surface, the love was still real. Changed in its nature. Yes, it was no longer the uncomplicated, forward-moving love of a man building towards something with someone he trusted. It had become the more complicated love of a man who understood what he had actually been holding and could not simply set it down because understanding had arrived. Love is not a light switch. You cannot turn it off when the information changes. You can only decide what to do with it going forward. I decided to keep it contained and to build the rest of what I needed around it. On the 3rd evening, a Thursday, Vanessa came out to the back porch where I was having coffee and sat beside me in the chair she had always claimed as hers. The night was mild. The maple tree in the yard was holding its last leaves in the early darkness. She put her head briefly on my shoulder and said, with warmth that sounded entirely real, "I have really missed this." I kept my breathing steady. "Me too," I said. That was true. I had missed this. The proximity, the ordinary comfort of being near someone you have built your daily life around. The problem was that I was sitting beside the actual version of the thing I had been missing, and the actual version was not what I had believed I was missing. That distinction, held in silence, was the most private grief of that entire week. On Saturday, I drove to my mother's house. She is 69 years old, still living in the house she and my father shared for 31 years before he passed. And she possesses the particular perceptiveness of a woman who has spent decades in genuine, attentive relationship with the people she loves. She reads a room. She reads a voice. She reads the quality of silence in a phone call. She had raised 2 sons, buried a husband, watched a community of people she loved move through their lives, and the accumulated understanding of all of that lived in her quietly but completely. She met me at the door before I knocked. She looked at my face and said nothing. She let me in and fed me first, because that is always first, and then she sat across from me at the table she had eaten at for 38 years and folded her hands and looked at me with the expression I have known since I was 9 years old. "Tell me," she said. I told her everything. The hallway, the phone call, the paper bag, and the tulips. The 7 weeks of counseling I had participated in fully while she was participating in strategically. Claudette's findings. The second LLC. Jerome Patterson. The Riverside District lease with both their names on it. My mother listened to all of it without a word. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. Long enough that the refrigerator cycled on and off in the kitchen silence. Then she said, "Your daddy used to tell me that the most dangerous assumption a person can make about someone who loves them is that the love will keep them from seeing clearly." I looked at her. "Vanessa made that assumption about you," she said. "She looked at how much you loved her, and she decided that was the wall. That it would stop you from looking at anything she did not want you to look at." "She was not wrong about the love," I said. "No," my mother said. "She was wrong about what it would make you do with what you saw." She reached across the table and covered my hand with hers. Her hands are small and warm and have been steady under hard things for longer than I have been alive. "You are going to handle this the right way," she said. "Not because it is easy, because it is who you are." I drove back that evening with the particular steadiness of a man who has been reminded of himself at the moment he most needed the reminder. On Sunday evening, Claudette sent the completed file. I opened it at Darnell's kitchen table with him sitting beside me, both of us reading through it together section by section. Every transfer documented, every date confirmed, the full financial architecture of what had been built, what it was worth, and what had been diverted. Jerome Patterson's professional history, his tenure at his firm, his existing Meridian Group relationship. The secondary LLC, fully detailed. The Riverside lease. At the bottom of the file, a single additional note. Claudette had run the timeline. The secondary LLC had been registered 3 weeks before our 7th wedding anniversary. 3 weeks before the anniversary dinner Vanessa had been warm and present for. The one where she had said she was grateful for everything we had built and that she wanted to keep building it. Darnell read that part and looked at the table. "She was always managing the timeline," he said. "Yes," I said. "Every piece of it." I closed the file, went back to Terrence's guest room, opened the notebook to a clean page, and wrote 5 things in a specific order. The 5 things I would say at the dinner. The order mattered. Sequence was everything. I capped the pen. Then I called my mother and talked to her for 20 minutes about her garden and the book she was reading, and nothing connected to any of this. That night, I slept for 7 hours without interruption. I planned the reconciliation dinner with the same methodical, structural precision I bring to every significant project. Not out of coldness, out of respect for what was at stake. When something matters, you do not wing it. You account for every variable you can control, and you go in knowing exactly what you intend to accomplish. An architect who walks onto a build site without understanding his load-bearing walls is not an architect. He is a gambler. I have never been a gambler. The restaurant was Vanessa's suggestion. A place called Garrison's, warm lighting, dark wood tables, linen that was heavy enough to feel like something, the kind of ambience that reads as a special occasion without announcing itself too loudly. She had mentioned it during one of our Sunday reconciliation calls, her voice warmer than it had been in months, saying it was the kind of place that felt like a real fresh start. I noted the recommendation without reacting to the irony of a woman who had no intention of a fresh start, suggesting the perfect setting for one. I made the reservation that same afternoon. I confirmed it twice during the week. I requested the corner table specifically, and when the host asked whether there was a preference for any other arrangement, I said no. The corner was what I needed. It was visible from multiple points in the room and positioned in a way that gave me a clear view of the entrance. Every seat in a room matters if you understand what the room is for. Then I made 4 additional calls. The first was to Darnell. He and Carla would arrive before us and be seated within clear sight line of my table. He asked no questions about why when I told him the time, and I offered no further explanation, because we had been brothers for 41 years and the logistics of what I was doing did not require narration for him to understand the shape of it. He simply said, "We'll be there," and that was the end of that conversation. The second call was to Paulette Harrison, my mother's oldest friend. She is 64, a retired family law attorney who spent 32 years in courtrooms watching people discover that the documents they had trusted and the people they had believed in were 2 different things entirely. She carries herself with the particular calm authority of a woman who has navigated high-stakes rooms so consistently that the high-stakes part no longer affects her posture. She agreed immediately, said to text her the address and the time, and we were off the phone in under 3 minutes. That efficiency was itself a form of support. The third call was to Gerald Whitmore, my firm's senior partner. Gerald is 61, methodical, principled in the specific way of a man who has spent decades building a professional reputation and is therefore acutely sensitive to anything that threatens the integrity of an endorsement. He had met Vanessa at firm events across several years. He had formed an opinion of her, and of us together, that was based entirely on what I had presented in good faith and what she had performed with considerable skill. More specifically, Gerald sat on the board of the Urban Business Development Coalition. 2 years prior, that organization had awarded a small business growth grant to Caldwell Event Design. I had submitted a professional reference as part of that application. I had written it sincerely, in full belief of what I was endorsing, and the implicit weight of my name and my professional reputation had been attached to that application. That reference had helped a business obtain public support. A business that was, at the same moment it was receiving that support, being quietly restructured in ways that excluded the very person whose credibility had helped secure it. Gerald deserved to know what his organization's endorsement had been used to build. I owed him that clarity, and when I told him on the phone, carefully, with enough detail to be useful and not a word more, he was quiet for a long moment and then said, simply and without drama, "I will be there." That was all he needed to say. The fourth call was to my attorney, whose name I will leave private, to confirm that Claudette's complete documentation package was in the precise form that would be most useful for the legal conversation that would need to follow the dinner. He confirmed it was, and he said what attorneys who are good at their work say when they have looked at something solid. "You are in a strong position." I thanked him and hung up. I spent the 4 days leading up to the dinner maintaining the same careful surface I had held all week. Present at home, attentive, unhurried. Each evening I sat with Vanessa and participated in the ordinary life she believed was still intact. We cooked dinner together one night, and she was warm and close in the way she had been during the counseling weeks, and I paid attention to all of it the way you pay attention to something you are seeing for the last time. Not with grief in the moment, but with the full awareness that the moment will not repeat. Each night after she went to sleep, I took the notebook to the kitchen table and reviewed what I knew in the exact order I intended to say it. Sequence. That was everything. The wrong information delivered in the wrong order gives the other person time to construct a defense at each step. The right information delivered in the right order does not give that time. Each piece arrives before the previous one has been fully absorbed, and by the end the picture is complete, and the room understands it before anyone has had the chance to revise it. I rehearsed the sequence 4 times over 4 nights. The night before the dinner, I read through the notebook from the first page to the last. The original notes from the hallway. Claudette's summary translated into plain language. The 5 statements and their order. Then I closed it and put it in my briefcase and went to the phone. I called my mother. We talked for 20 minutes about her garden and the book she was reading and the small, ordinary, forward-moving business of her continued life. When she asked how I was, I told her I was ready. She said, "I know, baby." We said goodnight. I went to bed at 10:45. I was asleep before 11. That is the other thing nobody tells you about doing the right thing with full preparation behind it. When the work is done, you can actually rest. The anxiety lives in the gap between where you are and where you need to be. When there is no gap, there is nothing left to be anxious about. Tomorrow I would walk into Garrison's knowing everything I needed to know, carrying everything I needed to carry, with every person I needed in the room already seated. The only thing left was to show up and do what I had built the whole thing to do. I arrived at Garrison's 40 minutes before the reservation. I do this before every significant presentation. I arrive early. I sit in the space. I let the room become familiar before the work begins so that nothing about the environment catches me off guard when I need my full attention on something other than my surroundings. The host, a young man named Antoine, walked me to the corner table. I thanked him, sat, ordered water, and spent 35 minutes in the particular stillness that comes when you have done the preparation and the only thing left is to be present for what you built. Darnell and Carla arrived at 7:12. They were seated 2 tables to my left without acknowledgement beyond one brief glance between Darnell and me that confirmed we were both exactly where we were supposed to be. Paulette arrived at 7:17. She wore a dark blazer and the calm expression of a woman who has sat at far higher stakes tables than this one and found all of them manageable. Gerald Whitmore arrived at 7:22 and took his seat with the composed gravity of a man who had been told something unsettling and was choosing to witness it with his eyes fully open. Vanessa arrived at 7:30. She came through the restaurant entrance in the deep green dress that she knew I loved. Her hair was down, natural and full. She moved through the room with the ease of a woman who believed she was walking toward a future she had designed. She smiled when she saw me, warm, present, and so thoroughly convincing that for 1/2 second something in my chest responded before my mind caught up. She kissed my cheek. She sat across from me. She settled in with the comfort of someone who believed she was completely in control of the room she was sitting in. "You chose well," she said, looking around at Garrison's with approval. "I tried to think of everything," I said. She smiled at me over the menu. We ordered. The food came. The wine was poured. For 45 minutes we had a dinner that looked, from the outside, exactly like what she believed it was. She talked about a client, a venue she had toured, her plans for the business in the year ahead. She was warm. She asked about my projects. She touched my hand twice. She was extraordinary at this, and I watched all of it with the clear eyes of a man who understood that he was watching a performance from someone who did not know she was sharing the stage. Then she set her fork down with a small, deliberate gesture and looked at me with the sincere, open expression she had clearly prepared for this moment. "Brandon," she said, her voice dropping to the register she used for the conversations she wanted to feel significant. "I know the last few months have been painful for both of us. I know I wasn't showing up the way I should have. But sitting here with you tonight, I feel like we are genuinely, finally, on the other side of the worst of it. I want to build on this. I really do." The table was quiet. I looked at her for a long moment. I let the silence hold. Not for effect, because I wanted to see her clearly one final time before everything changed. Then I said, "I want to show you something." I reached into my jacket and laid 3 documents on the table between us. Claudette's summary on top, printed clean. The LLC registration documents beneath. The financial transfer records at the bottom. Vanessa looked at the papers, and something in her face changed in a way I had never witnessed in 11 years of watching her face. The warmth did not shatter. It withdrew, quietly, completely, the way water pulls back before you have registered the tide changing. "The business account I co-signed," I said, my voice steady and conversational, "carries a second entity your attorney registered 22 months ago. A second LLC, a different name, your signature and Jerome Patterson's on the formation documents. The real revenue from everything Caldwell Event Design built has been processing through that second account. My name is not on it." She said nothing. "I also know about the Riverside District lease," I said. A silence that had weight. "I came home early the night before our reconciliation," I continued. "I had tulips and your favorite dinner. I came in through the side door, and I stood in the hallway, and I heard you tell your mother that you needed 6 more months. Until the Meridian contract closed. Then you were walking out and not looking back." Vanessa looked at me. For the first time that entire evening, perhaps for the first time in longer than that, she was completely present. Not performing, not managing, not maintaining a surface. Just there, in the room with me, with the truth between us on the table where she could not rearrange it. I turned slightly in my chair. "Gerald," I said. Gerald Whitmore set down his glass 2 tables to my left and met my eyes directly. Vanessa turned and saw him. She saw Darnell and Carla. She saw Paulette's composed, measured presence. And she understood, in the space of a single moment, what kind of room she was actually sitting in. Not the room she had designed. The room I had. The business growth grant, I said, was supported by my professional reference. Gerald sits on the board that awarded it. He is here because he has a right to understand what his endorsement was used to build. I paused. He is the only person at this dinner who is here for information. Everyone else is here because they love me and they deserve to witness me handle this correctly. Gerald acknowledged her with a brief, measured nod and sat back. I looked at Vanessa. I am not here to hurt you, I said. I am here because the truth was owed to this room. To Gerald. To the people who have watched me spend 7 weeks in a counselor's office believing we were rebuilding something. And to you. Because you deserve to know that I know. All of it. The timeline. The business. The exit you were engineering while I was showing up to every session and holding your hand through the hard parts. Her eyes were wet. She had stopped trying to manage what showed on her face, and what showed was something close to the real thing. Not guilt, not regret exactly, but the particular exhaustion of someone who has been carrying a constructed reality for a long time and has finally been relieved of the weight of maintaining it. I reached up and removed my wedding band. I did not throw it. I set it flat on the table in front of my plate, the way you set down a pen when the document is signed and the transaction is complete. My attorney will be in touch with yours, I said. The co-signed loan and the original investment create a conversation we need to have in the right setting, with the right people in the room. I stood. I buttoned my jacket. I looked at her one final time. This woman who had read book spines at a party and talked with me until the chairs were on the tables, and said yes 3 times at the top of her voice. And I said the last true thing I had left. I hope you find what you were looking for, Vanessa. I genuinely mean that. But I will not be what it cost you to find it. And I walked out of Garrison's into the cool night air, with the city around me and my hands steady and my character, as my father would have said, still completely and entirely intact. There is a specific shape to the period that follows a significant ending. People who have not been through it tend to imagine it as a single sustained grief, a long, gray, featureless stretch of difficulty. What it actually is, when you pay honest attention to it, is more complicated and, eventually, more interesting than that. It comes in layers. Some days the loss sits in the foreground and is the first thing you feel when you wake up. Other days it sits further back, present but not primary, something you carry rather than something that carries you. And then, gradually, the distance between those two kinds of days increases, and the days where the loss sits further back begin to outnumber the other kind. And one morning you realize the shift has happened without your having noticed the exact moment of it. That is how recovery actually works. Not in a dramatic moment of clarity, but in the slow, patient accumulation of mornings that belong to you. The night of the dinner I stayed at Darnell's, which I had arranged 2 weeks in advance. I had packed what mattered on a Thursday afternoon while Vanessa was at a client meeting. My architectural drafting tools in a leather roll my father had given me when I finished graduate school. His watch, which I had worn every day since the year after he died. The photograph of my parents at their 25th anniversary dinner, taken at a restaurant my father had saved for 6 months to afford. My good coat. My notebook. Clothes for a month. I left my house key on the kitchen counter. No note. The key said everything a note would have said, and said it more cleanly. I left the tulips in a glass of water on the kitchen windowsill because they deserved better than to wilt in the hallway, and because, even then, even after everything, I was not capable of being careless with something living. My phone had 19 missed calls and 3 texts from Vanessa by midnight. I read the texts once. The first was defensive. The second was quieter. The third said simply, "I am sorry, Brandon." I put the phone face down on the nightstand, and I slept for 9 hours. The first full night of sleep I had had in 7 weeks. Not the sleep of a man without grief. The sleep of a man who has put down something very heavy and felt his body, for the first time, understand that it no longer needs to hold that weight. In the days that followed, I went to work. I sat in client meetings and contributed clearly and with focus. I reviewed project files and made decisions that were good decisions, not compromised ones, not distracted ones. My colleagues noticed nothing. My work held me the way genuine work always does, by requiring the best version of you and returning something real in the exchange. On the 8th day, Claudette called. Vanessa's attorneys reached out, she said. They want to open a settlement conversation. The language they used was careful, but the intention was clear. They want resolution without extended litigation. She wants it quiet, I said. She wants it fast and quiet, Claudette said. Which tells you that the documentation produced exactly the effect it was meant to produce. Her attorneys know what they are looking at. They know what it could support in a formal proceeding. What do you recommend? Arrive at the table with a real number, she said. Calculated from the actual facts. Not punitive, not emotionally inflated, not generous out of guilt. What you contributed, what was diverted without disclosure, what a fair and documented accounting says you are owed. Bring that number and hold it. I went back to the notebook. I spent 2 evenings, careful and methodical, building the complete accounting. The original investment. The monthly operating contributions in the first 18 months. The household funds that had moved toward business expenses that now appeared on records I had not been shown. The professional reference that had supported the grant and lent credibility to a business that was simultaneously being restructured away from any claim I could make on it. The number was significant. I brought it to Claudette. She made 2 small adjustments based on the legal framework and took it to the table. Jerome Patterson called on a Wednesday, 3 weeks after the dinner. He said his name clearly when I answered, and then he said, "I am calling because I owe you that much." I listened. He told me that when he met Vanessa, she had described herself as separated, in the process of a quiet and amicable divorce, with the legal arrangements proceeding slowly. He said he had not discovered the actual situation until someone connected to his professional network mentioned the Garrison's dinner and the nature of it. He had confronted Vanessa that same week. The conversation that followed had clarified, he said, a number of things about the nature of what they had been building together, including the fact that she had structured the second LLC in a way that was beginning to move his equity stake into a position he had not agreed to. She was managing my timeline too, he said. There was something in his voice that was not quite surprise, more like the sound of a man updating and understanding he had been resistant to fully acquiring. Yes, I said. I am sorry for my part, he said. I understand that does not repair anything, but I needed you to know I did not walk into this fully informed. I sat with that for a moment. I believe you, I said. And I did. Not because it changed anything material, but because it was true, and the truth had become the thing I was most committed to being accurate about in both directions. After we hung up, I sat at Darnell's kitchen table and thought about what Vanessa had built. Not the business, the human architecture. Multiple people, each seeing only the portion of the picture she had designed for their angle of view. Each one believing their piece was the whole. It was, in its own way, an extraordinary feat of construction, just not the kind anyone should admire. Priya, Vanessa's younger sister, texted me on a Sunday morning. She and I had always had a genuine, independent rapport. She was a pediatric nurse who said what she meant without calculating the consequences of meaning it, which I had always respected. I did not know the full of it, she wrote. I want you to know that. And I want you to know that I think you are a good man, Brandon. I am sorry it went the way it did. I read it twice. Then I wrote back. Thank you. I know you mean that. Take care of yourself, Priya. Carla, Darnell's wife, knocked on the guest room door on the 19th evening and said, "Come sit with us." No explanation, no occasion, just the simple invitation of people who wanted company in the room. We sat in the living room and watched basketball and talked about things that had nothing to do with any of this and laughed twice at something genuinely funny. And that ordinary evening, warm, uncomplicated, just people who loved each other in a room together, was, without ceremony or announcement, the moment I felt the thing inside me begin, for the first time, to soften at the edges. Not disappear. Soften, which is the beginning of something real. The formal settlement negotiation concluded on a Wednesday, 11 days from Claudette's first approach to a signed agreement. I want to say that plainly, without dramatizing it, because the plainness of the statement is itself the point. When the documentation is complete, when the legal exposure is unambiguous, when both sets of attorneys have looked at the same file and understood what it contains, the path to resolution becomes significantly shorter than either side might have originally anticipated. 11 days. That is what honest, airtight paperwork does to a negotiation. The number they settled on was what Claudette and I had brought to the table. Not everything. I want to be honest about that in both directions. No legal settlement can fully account for the totality of what is taken in a situation like this. You cannot put a precise dollar value on 11 years of direction. You cannot invoice someone for the version of your future you built your decisions around, or for the professional opportunities you passed on because you were investing in a shared life, or for the particular grief of discovering that what you were building had a different floor plan than the one you were shown. Those things are real. They simply do not fit into a legal column. But the number on the agreement was real. It was documented. It was the honest, traceable figure that the evidence supported without embellishment or emotional inflation. Every digit in it came from an actual record. And there is a particular satisfaction, not triumph, not vindication, something quieter and more durable than either of those, in a figure that can withstand scrutiny because it is built entirely from the truth. The morning the wire transfer confirmation appeared on my phone, I was at my desk at the firm reviewing structural drawings for the commission I had been preparing for. My phone buzzed on the corner of the desk. I looked at the notification. I set the phone face down. I continued reviewing the drawings for 2 full minutes, finishing the section I had been working through, because the drawings deserved that focus, and I had learned, in the preceding months, that compartmentalization was not the same thing as avoidance. Compartmentalization, done right, is how a person shows up fully for everything in their life rather than allowing one thing to bleed into everything else. Then I picked the phone up and looked at the number. I thought about the man who had stood at a kitchen sink after midnight looking at a backyard maple tree and made a decision in the quiet, who had opened a notebook and started building from what he knew, who had driven to his brother's house in the early morning because he needed someone he trusted in the room, who had sat across from Claudette and listened to everything she had found and not looked away from any of it, who had planned every seat in a restaurant with the care of a man who understood that the arrangement of a room tells you everything about who is in control of what happens inside it. He was careful when being careless would have been easier. He was precise when imprecision would have cost less in the moment and far more in the result. He did not move until the picture was complete, and when the picture was complete, he moved with everything he had. He deserved the number on that wire confirmation. I called Claudette at 2 in the afternoon. I thanked her with the specificity she had earned, not the generic gratitude that gets exchanged in professional transactions, but the kind that names the particular things. The precision of the documentation, the sequencing of the approach, the way she had built the case to its full height before showing the opposing side a single brick of it, the confidence she had taken to the table because there was nothing in the file that could be credibly challenged. She said, as I expected she would, "That is the job." Then she said, "What are you going to do now, Brandon?" I looked at the structural drawings still open on my desk. "There is a major project presentation in 3 weeks," I said. "The largest commission my firm has pursued in 4 years. I have been preparing it since before any of this started. I did not let any of what happened interrupt the preparation, and I intend to walk into that conference room and give it the full weight of everything I know how to do." A small, genuine pause. "Good," she said. And there was something in that single word, something in the quiet approval of a woman who deals in documented facts and is therefore not given to empty encouragement, that felt like one of the finest compliments I had received in a very long time. The divorce proceedings were, by comparison, entirely uncomplicated. Both attorneys conducted themselves professionally. There were no courtrooms, no public moments, no dramatic reversals. Just the administrative and legal process of formally recognizing what had been true in practice for considerably longer than it had been true on paper. I signed my portion of the paperwork on a Thursday morning at a conference table in my attorney's office, the pen moving smoothly across 3 pages, and when I set it down, I did not feel triumph. I did not feel the specific grief I had felt in the early weeks after the hallway. What I felt was completion, the closing of a long chapter, the particular quiet that settles when something has been genuinely resolved rather than merely set aside. Gerald Whitmore called me the following week. He told me, carefully and professionally, that the Urban Business Development Coalition had received a notification through its standard annual review process flagging a financial irregularity in the account history of a business that had previously received a coalition grant. The irregularity pertained to the undisclosed relationship between the original account and a secondary entity. The matter was being handled through the coalition's standard procedures, which were thorough and which moved, he said, without haste, and without mercy once initiated. He was calling as a courtesy, not to ask for anything, not to relitigate anything, simply to close a loop that he felt had been left open. I learned something from this experience, he said, about the difference between the story a situation tells and the structure underneath it. I have been on this board for 11 years, and I thought I knew how to read an application. I am discovering I was reading the surface. We both were, I said, in our own ways. Yes. A pause. You handled yourself with a great deal of integrity through all of it. I want you to know I noticed. I thanked him and meant it in full. The Meridian Group contract was placed under compliance review by the corporate client's internal team. I learned through a separate professional channel. Irregularities in the formation documents of the secondary LLC had surfaced during the client's due diligence process, the kind of thorough review that large institutional clients conduct before committing to significant contractual relationships. The contract was suspended pending investigation. The review was expected to be extensive. I had not arranged that. That is the sentence I most want to be clear about. I told the truth to the people who were owed it, in the room where it needed to be told, backed by documentation that had been built carefully and presented honestly. Everything that followed, the Meridian review, the coalition notification, the professional consequences that arrived at the address of a business that had been structured on a foundation of incomplete disclosures, happened because that is what happens when documented financial irregularities exist and thorough parties look carefully enough to find them. I simply told the truth, at the right time, to the right people, with the right evidence behind it. That is all any honest person can do. And sometimes, when the preparation is real and the documentation is airtight and the people in the room are the people who should have been in the room all along, that is enough. 8 months after the night in the hallway, I signed my name to a lease on a second-floor apartment in the North Side District, 3 blocks from the architecture firm where I had spent 18 years building my career. 2 bedrooms. Clean, open lines in every room. Morning light in the living room that comes in from the east, which means the first thing the sun does every day is fill that space with warmth before I have done a single thing to earn it. A kitchen with enough counter space to work in properly, which I did not know until I had it that it was something I cared about. I signed my name at the bottom of 3 pages and felt the pen solid and real in my hand. My name. My signature. My apartment. No second name beside mine on any line of any document. I carried the first box up myself. Darnell was there with his truck and his steady, uncomplaining presence, and he carried plenty of boxes, and Carla arrived at noon with a pot of stew and the warmth of someone who understands that the most loving thing you can offer a person who is rebuilding is simply the company of people who are glad to be in the room. But the first box I took myself, deliberately, because I wanted to feel the weight of what I was keeping and carry it up the stairs into the new space with my own hands. That box had my drafting tools in it, my father's watch, the framed photograph of my parents at their 25th anniversary, the narrow-ruled notebook that had started a process and followed it, page by page, all the way through. I set it on the kitchen counter and stood in the empty apartment and let the quiet of it arrive. The afternoon light was moving across the bare floors in long, warm strips. The maple I could see from the living room window was just beginning to come back, the earliest green of a new season visible at the tips of the branches. The courtyard below held raised garden boxes where the neighbor on the ground floor grew tomatoes with the patient, daily attention of someone who understands that good things take exactly the time they take. I looked at all of it, and I thought about the man who had stood in a dark hallway on an October night with white tulips in his hand and a brown paper bag of his wife's favorite food, and had heard something that changed the shape of everything he thought he was building. I thought about what that man did next. He set the flowers down gently. He put the food in the oven so it would not go to waste. He stood at a kitchen sink and looked at a backyard for a long time. He got very quiet inside himself, the way an architect gets quiet before he puts a pencil to paper, before he begins the work of designing something that needs to hold weight. And then he opened a notebook. That man did not yell. He did not collapse. He did not hand his grief to someone else and demand they manage it. He sat with it, understood it, converted it into something with traction, and then he moved forward with the precision and the patience and the clear-eyed steadiness of someone who has learned the difference between reacting and deciding. He deserved every morning he is living now. The couch arrived on Monday. I positioned it myself, moved it twice before it was right, and when it was right I sat in it and looked at the room. Empty still, but beginning to hold the shape of a life. My life, decided by me, for reasons that were entirely mine. Above the mantel, I hung a framed piece of calligraphy my mother brought me on her first visit. My father had commissioned it as an anniversary gift to her, decades ago. A single line from a passage he had loved for reasons he never fully explained but never needed to. A man of character carries himself the same whether anyone is watching or not. She handed it to me at the door and said, "He would have wanted you to have this one now." I held it for a long time. Then I hung it where I could see it from the kitchen table every morning. The project presentation happened 6 weeks after I moved in. I walked into that conference room and gave the finest, most focused presentation of my architectural career. Not because all the grief was resolved, not because the loss had ceased to carry weight, but because I have always been the kind of man who shows up fully for the things that are genuinely his. And my work was mine. It always had been. No one had used it, leveraged it, or diverted it for a purpose I was not told about. It was the cleanest thing I owned. My senior partner called it the strongest work the firm had produced in 4 years. We won the commission. I stopped at the grocery store on the way home that evening. I bought the ingredients for the pasta I used to make for myself before the marriage and had slowly, without noticing, stopped making because it was easier to cook around someone else's preferences than to maintain my own. I cooked it in my own kitchen, with music I had chosen without consulting anyone, at a pace that answered only to my own hunger. I ate at my own table. Darnell calls every Sunday. We keep the calls to 20 minutes, easy and warm, the natural rhythm of two brothers who have been through something hard together and come out the other side still whole. He asked me recently whether I thought about dating again. I thought about it honestly before answering, because that is the only way I know how to answer things. Not yet, I said, but not from fear. I'm doing something I should have done better the first time around. I'm learning what I actually need, not just what I can build around someone else's life. He was quiet for a moment. That's the right answer, he said. I had a good teacher, I said. My mother comes once a month. She brings food and her reading glasses and her garden updates and the complete, unhurried company of a woman who loves me without condition or agenda. She walks through the apartment each time like she is reading a room, taking its measure, understanding how it is holding me. Last month, she stood at the living room window for a long time looking at the courtyard below and the city beyond it and the early spring light moving through everything. Your father would have loved this apartment, she said. I know, I said. He would have sat at that kitchen table and said exactly 2 sentences about it. What 2 sentences? She smiled at the window. He would have said, "This is a good room, Brandon." And then he would have said, "Now keep filling it with the right things." I looked at the apartment, at the framed calligraphy above the mantel, at the morning light coming in from the east, at the life assembling itself around me, piece by piece, in a shape that was entirely and honestly mine. I am not going to tell you that I am fully healed. That would not be the truth, and the truth is the only currency I am still willing to trade in. What I will tell you is that I am building, the same way I have always built, methodically, precisely, with full attention to what is real and genuine and load-bearing, and what is only the appearance of those things. I am applying the same standard to the rest of my life that I always applied to the structures I designed, and I am finding, in the process, that the standard produces the same result. Something that holds, something that lasts, something that does not collapse when the weight becomes real. This past Tuesday, I sat at my kitchen table before sunrise and drank my coffee and looked at the courtyard below where the first light was coming in flat and golden and entirely without condition. The neighbor was already out with her watering can, moving between the garden boxes with the quiet, attentive care of someone doing the daily work of keeping something alive. I watched her for a while. I thought about patience. How it had been both the thing that cost me and the thing that ultimately saved me. How patience in the service of the wrong thing is just another name for delay. But patience in the service of the right process. The process of finding the truth, documenting it, presenting it to the right people at the right time, and then rebuilding from a foundation that is genuinely yours. That patience is something entirely different. That patience is what you live in afterward. My father's watch is on my wrist. His words are above the mantel. His voice is in my head on the mornings that require something steadier than what I can produce alone. And the tulips, the white ones I left in a glass of water on the kitchen windowsill of the house I walked out of, I thought about them for a long time in the months after. What they meant. What the man who bought them had been hoping for. The care he had taken to get the right ones. To remember a small detail from a Saturday morning 3 years before. To show up with the exact thing she had mentioned once and never expected anyone to remember. That man was paying attention. He had always been paying attention. He just had not yet understood that the quality of love you give someone is not a guarantee of the quality of love you receive. He understands it now. And what he is building now, this apartment, this morning, this clean and chosen life, is not a consolation prize. It is not the lesser version of what he thought he was building before. It is the real thing. Finally, completely, without construction or performance or someone else's timeline attached to it. The real thing. Lord, it is finally more than enough. If this story stayed with you until the end, you already know why it matters. Share it with someone who needed to hear it today. And if you are the steady one, the one who keeps showing up, who keeps believing, who keeps doing the work, know this. Your faithfulness was never the weakness. It was always the foundation. Build on it.